Welcome to another episode of the Basketball Show, Inside Carolina's Monday evening live show. I'm Tommy Ashley. That's Justin Jackson in the middle, Rob Harrington on the screen as well. Shout out to Johnny T-Shirt, johnnytshirt.com. Scroll at the bottom, says it all. Drop your questions in the chat. We got a few things we want to talk about, but we also want to hear some chat questions, either on the message target or, the UNC basketball premium message board or here in the live chat. Like Jim Holland says in the chat, hit the like button, subscribe to the YouTube channel so you get notified when we go live. Just as before I forget, tomorrow night, Rob and I post game Navy, I guess around 9 o'clock or so. So look forward to that one. Gentlemen, let's get into this quickly. Justin, I'll ask you the question and then we can bounce it back and forth. When you're playing quote unquote lesser teams, is it difficult to stay focused on the task, and is it difficult to pour in everything you've got when you know you've got a tough stretch, maybe a few days out or a couple of weeks out? How does that work for a player in the middle of this?
It's human nature. You think about anything in life, honestly, if you know it's going to be easy, you're not going to put everything you have into it, right? So it's the same with basketball. If you know you're more talented, if this is a team that's coming in for, I think they mentioned on the broadcast, that's coming in to kind of make some money for their NIL collective. It's tough. And I think that's why you saw the first half go the way it did against Central. Like 10 turnovers in the first half and 0 in the second. For me, that was purely because they kind of locked in a little bit more, to start the second half and on, as opposed to the first half. They were kind of going through the motions at times, trying to make passes or plays maybe you wouldn't in a normal type of game. So I think I was more encouraged that they did lock it in that second half than worried about how the first half went, because it's human nature. Like, it's hard to show up against an NC Central like it is against Kansas. Like, that's the reality of it. So, I'm glad they got it going in the second half.
Rob, when you look at it, you've got Central. They follow up with Navy tomorrow night, Tuesday night. I already mentioned that at 7 o'clock. We've seen teams in the past sort of sleepwalk through them and not get much out of them other than a win. To Justin's point, I think this team has realized and maybe realized at halftime of that game, and we'll see how it translates to tomorrow night, the importance of this chemistry thing, especially with so many new guys. Your take on that aspect of playing these games, because I don't know how much better you get when you're just so much better than the opponent, but there's certainly value in playing real live games against different people when you're still trying to build your, especially with Trimble out, your chemistry or whatever you want to call it there, your synergy, I guess we like to use on basketball talks.
Yeah, I think there's something to be gained. In part, I'm hopeful that it's still the beginning of the season. I would dislike this lull more if it were next month. You still have the sort of early season excitement. When we looked at the schedule, though, and everyone talked about the schedule is watered down compared to last year, far fewer, tougher games. This is the weakest stretch of the year because it's 4 straight games of teams that none of which is probably in the top 100. We'll see about that, but Central and Navy, going all the way to Radford before that, and then going to St. Bonaventure next Tuesday. That's 4 in a row against not really opponents that Carolina should just be able to, as Justin said, probably get away with sleepwalking a little bit, just being human nature. And now it stiffens up considerably after that. So we're going to see them get tested. And in fact, I don't think any of us probably appreciated how tough a test Georgetown might be, because when they scheduled that game, it was like, oh, this is a name opponent, but has really been down bad. Now Georgetown will come to the Smith Center and offer another stout challenge. So they just sort of have to get through these 4, halfway there already. I'm hopeful, especially, the one fortuitous aspect of this with Trimble being out is how the new starting lineup will mesh, the continuing process of all the new faces getting acclimated, as you said, Tommy. So I do think there's something to be gained. It's more, I think it's second layer as opposed to first layer is like win loss. I mean, they just sort of have to win these games, but it's that second layer of stuff to look at with more nuance, and I do think there's value there.
Justin, how much carries over from game to game? Just out of curiosity, people in the chat say develop chemistry, get a rhythm and all, but how much really carries over from one night to the next, especially when you're playing, in the NBA, you're playing a lot more games and a lot tighter schedule. But in college, like here, Carolina plays tonight, or excuse me, tomorrow night, then they don't play again till next Tuesday night. How much translates? Like if you get hot on a Friday night against Central, does that carry into a Tuesday night against Navy or down the line? How does that work for a player?
Yeah, I think it's just the mentality. I think it's the confidence that builds, right? Confidence, in my opinion, doesn't go away um, until something takes it away. And so when you see, you know, I think that's with this stretch of games. Obviously, it's almost like you're buying time as well with Seth being hurt and him trying to come back. But at the same time, like there were situations in games where these 4 games are gonna be good to continue to mesh and continue to figure out where guys want the ball. There was a situation where Jonathan Powell drove and tried to throw a bullet pass to Caleb Wilson right there on the block, as opposed to you drive and from then on, like from here on out, just throw it up to the rim and he's going to go get it. Right. And so it's just little things like that these games, even though the competition is not as stout as what they're going to have, you continue to build that chemistry. You continue to build the confidence knowing, hey, if I go here, I know that this guy's got my back here. If I go here, I know he wants the ball in this situation. So to your question, I think it definitely carries over. Obviously, you hate, like, especially as a player, you hate having to only practice for a week. Like that. I used to hate that. Like in Christmas time, like Coach Williams would just practice and practice, and there was no games. But as far as like confidence wise, like mentally, like that's why I love to see Jonathan Powell the way that he played aggressive in that game, right? Like you play aggressive like that in that game, and you know the guys in front of you obviously aren't as good, but in the moment you're not thinking about the fact that you're just way more talented than the guy in front of you. You're just going and making a play, and if you have success with it mentally, it's like, okay, I can do this, right? And so I think I think it'll translate over and continue on.
Talking with Rob Harrington, Justin Jackson here on Inside Carolina's Basketball Show. Shout out to the almost 150 we got in here live. Click on the QR code there or go to InsideCarolina.com. Make sure you're subscribed to the new site on On3 Network or the same site on the On3 Network. Same great content. Rob, one thing Justin mentioned there, and I think this is important, and I think this is why this team's better than the last few years, is knowing where guys want the ball if I'm ready to shoot or if I'm on the block. I felt like the last several years we've watched this team or Carolina struggle with entry passes, basic entry passes, not getting it. We've seen a ton of passes at people's feet or on the wrong side. Those type things, I think, in games like this, you can really work on, and it happens against people that don't really know your moves. It's not guys you see in practice every day. How important is it, to Justin's point, to get the ball where a guy wants it? And we talk about shooting pockets and all that stuff. And Justin, you can talk more about that in a second, but just get me the ball where I want it, where I've told you I need it, and where it goes. And being able to do it in games against Navy will eventually translate against doing it against Michigan State and so on and so forth, Rob. That's important here in this stretch, I think.
I like the fact that the team shares the ball much more liberally than they did last couple of years. And I'm not accusing last year's and the prior seasons guys of being selfish, but that the offense was just different. I think some of it is knowing where you're going to get the ball, but then maybe even more importantly is knowing that you might get the ball. A lot of what we saw the last couple of years were initial actions that would sometimes break down, and then the possession would devolve into a lot of dribbling. And you're not seeing that as much this year. And more people are involved in more plays, whether they ever get a pass or not. There's that possibility they might. that more people are getting touches. And I think if the coaches were on here with us right now, they'd say, well, yeah, it looks like your passing looks a lot better when you have big guys who are threats. Certainly that has helped too, because they do have, I mean, obviously Caleb Wilson's having a spectacular season, and Vasar is having an all conference type of year so far himself. I mean, very early, but we've talked over and over again throughout the early season that conceivably could be the best front court in the country, or certainly in that top tier. And I think they are making the guards look better too.
If folks are watching this and have not listened to the Coast to Coast, they had Tate Frazier on there last night. A good listen to hear that discussion, because Joey asked Tate that question about your point about the front court, Rob, and it was an interesting discussion there. So check out that if you haven't watched it. Justin, as I mentioned before, how important is it for guys to know where other players want the ball? I mean, it seems very simple to me, but I think it's a huge deal, especially for a shooter and especially for a guy on the block. With somebody like Caleb Wilson, you can about throw it anywhere you want. He's going to go get it. But it's not like that for everybody. Sort of speak to that aspect of the game, aspect of guard play, point guard play.
To that point, you're lucky when you have a guy like Caleb Wilson where you can throw it literally anywhere and he'll go get it. And kind of the same, even though he doesn't have the same bounce that Caleb Wilson has, his length and obviously being 7 feet. It's kind of the same with Henry when you throw it up to the rim. For shooting wise, I mean, some point guards have, I mean, I'll always go back to just watching Kendall Marshall, the way that he passed the ball. It seemed like the ball was always on time, which I think is a big aspect of it, and exactly where it needed to be, right? Like you rarely saw him pass to a shooter and him have to reach for it outside of where he was. For me, passing is real simple. Like just get it to where you need to get it to. Sometimes, there's situations hands might hit it, or you might have to go around a defender, whatever. But I think like looking at Kyan Evans and the way that he's been passing the ball, always being on time with the pass has been the biggest thing for me watching him, right? Like he's always, once he gets into the paint, being self-aware to know that he's not the biggest, most athletic guy. So his head and his eyes are always up. I mean, there was multiple times that he touched the paint against Central and it was a spray out, a kick out, or it was a lob to Caleb at the rim. So I think to your point, it is simple, to just get it to where the player is, but it's also very important to not, because shooters also have, in your mind, whenever you're getting ready to shoot, right, you have a rhythm to it. And if that rhythm is messed up at all, a lot of times it can throw some stuff off when it comes to your shot. So when a point guard's able, or a guard, or whoever it is able to get it to them right in rhythm for them to go straight up and shoot it, I think that's a massive aspect of it too.
Yeah, and Rob, he led into Kyan Evans' discussion, and another one of the points was the scoring balance. I think Kyan's done a good job of distributing the basketball, but scoring wise, let's talk about the Luka and the Evans aspect of the backcourt now, especially with Trimble out. Your thoughts, just in general, on the pairing, and then we'll sort of dig down into it a little bit deeper than that.
Well, they have some similar strengths. Obviously, they're both shooters, and they both have pretty decent size for a college backcourt. Neither of them is what I would consider to be overly athletic. I have been concerned, with Bogovac being so assertive, especially after Radford. He took all those threes. Evans, I don't think attempted any. I think that was the game he attempted one field goal or something. And then last game it was a little bit more balanced against Central. But I like to see that be more evenly distributed, because you don't want Evans to be the B option. I think it should be 1A, 1B, and it can fluctuate some from game to game. But I don't want him to be stifled or subservient to Bogovac or anyone else, because Evans is going to play a lot of minutes and he's going to be really important as a shooter, and he's shooting it really well by percentage. Would just like to see him take more. Last game I thought was a step in the right direction. Getting those guys in sync, because when they it could be a little bit of a culture shock. Coming out of these 4 games, when they get to Michigan State, it's not going to be so easy for them to just get straight to the rim and throw all these lobs that they're throwing, which are great, but they're going to have to get some very refined guard play, and they need those 2 guys to harmonize really quickly, really over the next 10 days prior to that Michigan State game at the latest.
Just looking at the season stats, Evans has shot the same amount of field goals, 25, as Seth Trimble has in half the games. Trimble in just 2 games, Evans in 4. Justin, how many points or how much shooting does Kyan Evans need to do for this team to be successful? I understand it's game-by-game basis, but just in general, I mean, 1 shot, I think we'd agree, is not enough for him, especially as good as he can shoot it. But your thoughts on Evans offensively?
I mean, I guess my question is like, when did he really pass up a shot last game? Right? Like, I think that's kind of the whole thing with like from game to game, to your point, is if he's getting everybody else involved, then I'm not worried about him getting shots up. Right? I mean, like, if he's the one that kind of substitutes in for, getting to the paint and putting pressure on the defense in that way, then he's getting everybody else touches, making everybody else feel good within the offense. And he's shown that he can still space and shoot it, right? Like, at the end of the day, he's also not a very big guard and very athletic, right? So him getting to the paint, I'm not expecting him to, his first look is to try to go finish at the rim. Yeah, he has the ability and has the touch and the feel to be able to do it when he needs to. But watching that game, I actually was more impressed with it probably than a couple of the other games that they've played, because it wasn't that he was just being, passing up shots or not being aggressive. Like, I thought he was doing exactly what he needed to do in a game like that, right? He needed to get, Caleb his touches. He needed to get Jonathan Powell his shots. He needed to get maybe Luka some shots, Henry some shots. Like, I'm not necessarily worried about Kyan Evans. I think I'm more impressed with his passing ability to this point than I expected him to be going into this season. I expected him to be somebody who was more of a shooting point guard, somebody who was ultra aggressive offensively, but not really a facilitator. But I'm seeing more of the facilitating, which gives me more hope because I already know he can shoot and what he can do whenever he is aggressive offensively.
Rob, your take on that aspect? I mean, I agree. Somebody in the chat, let me call out names since folks are cool to be here. Sam Rogers, it's so refreshing to see players that aren't out there hunting their own shots. That is a little bit different than we've seen from Carolina's guards over the last 2 or 3 years, 2 or 3, 4 years. As long as the offense is running and he's doing what he's supposed to do and they're getting shots and they're scoring points, does it matter how many points he scores or how many shots he gets up, Rob?
I think it's for me, it's more forward looking based on the caliber of competition they play. I agree with Justin that last game, I think he had 7 assists, which is really strong. And I wasn't expecting him to have games like that. And he's allowing the game to come to him. It's more the seesaw thing, especially with Bogovats, because after Radford, I was like, okay, how is Evans not taking any threes? And I came away from that one thinking they might have to clip Bogovats' wings a little bit, because a couple of those I thought a couple of his shots were pretty early, and the ball stuck to him some. And this offense isn't designed for that. Now, last game he was much more in balance too. So I think that's part of what I'm looking for. We talked about this 4-game stretch is everyone is playing their game comfortably, but also within the offensive setup. I totally agree. I mean, Evans made a bounce pass that I didn't think that he could make. I think it was last game. It wasn't super flashy, but it was on the move. And I was like, oh, okay, actually, he's a much more talented passer than I realized. And he has a poise about him that I like. My question is, okay, if you don't have, especially with Trimble out, guys who are getting to the rim freely, that they have to compensate for that somehow, because the front court won't always dominate. I mean, hopefully they'll dominate a lot and they'll keep them in games. But I'm looking for the guards to give them some outside punch. And I don't want Evans to get lost in the shuffle. I think they'll need him
Yeah, Justin, to that point, and the topic that Rob had written down is the balance there between Bogovats and Evans. I mean, is that a necessary thing? Because Bogovats is going to get his shots up. I mean, we've seen that. He's going to get them off. And so how much does it need to be balanced? And we always do these shows, whether it's football or whatever we're talking about, it's always game to game, and I understand that. But just in general, does there need to be some sort of a balance, or is it fine if Bogovats dominates the shots at least, and Evans is still doing the facilitating?
I think I think it's so early that it's really hard to know. Me personally, I think we are forgetting how the way Kyan Evans shot the ball and was aggressive offensively against Kansas changed how that game went as well, right? And so that's why I'm not necessarily as worried if there is a game where Kyan gets 7 less shots than Luka, right? Or he's, 4 for 7 from the field and, has 6, 7 assists. Like that's why I'm not necessarily worried because he's already shown in their biggest game that he has the ability offensively to be aggressive and to be a difference maker shooting the ball. I mean, like you said, Luka's going to be aggressive. Like Luka's not. There's not going to be any shying away at all from Luka, which is something that this team needs, especially without Seth. But that's why I think the balance of them. It'll just kind of change from game to game. When Kyan Evans, me personally, when Kyan Evans needs to be aggressive, I think he'll do exactly that, and I think he'll be successful. When he doesn't, and he's just trying to get other people involved, trying to get other people touches, because that's an important aspect, right? Like to this point, like I was looking at, I think they've assisted on like 60% of their field goals so far this season, right? As a player, when you feel like you're a part of the offense, even when you're not the one scoring the ball, but you're at least touching it, you're a part of the drive kick situation or whatever the play's called, the energy behind that player is totally different, right? So if Kyan Evans is just coming up and he's going into a ball screen and he's pulling up from 3, or, let's just say, heck, Stevenson hasn't been super aggressive offensively, but let's just say he doesn't touch the ball on offense for 6 minutes straight. Well, the next time that he gets the ball, more than likely, he's not going to have a rhythm to shoot the ball, right? But if you're at least touching it, from possession to possession, that's going to be different as the game goes on. So that's why I was encouraged by the way that Kyan's been playing, because it's like if he's doing that, then what he came in to do, that'll happen just organically, right? Like, but if he's able to distribute the way that he's doing, I think this team looks a whole lot different.
Indeed, Rob. And we talked about over the years, and this is something to Justin's point right there. Is sharing the basketball is one thing. You like to see sharing the basketball, but everybody involved in the offense. I think we've seen a lot more of that. And I think that for me is encouraging for this team to be successful in case somebody's having a bad night or in case somebody's in foul trouble and they're not out there, and then everybody's touching, and then Jonathan Powell's getting touches and he's ready to shoot. Jaren's ready to shoot. Just that aspect of what Kyan Evans is doing to me is, like we've talked about, a little bit better than I expected coming in, Rob. Just close us out on this topic with that thought that the sharing of the ball that this team does, I think, is probably the highlight of the season so far for me, other than Caleb Wilson just going ham. But I mean, that's the sharing is deeper than Caleb Wilson's thing for me. Your thoughts?
We talked in the offseason that the word out of the Smith Center was that they were going to change the offense. And all of us were saying, hallelujah, please put on the shelf all this dribbling. And I know they had really talented guys off the dribble, but it wasn't great to watch. And everyone wanted to see more movement, player movement, not just ball movement, player movement off the ball. And they said they were going to do that, and they have. The offense isn't running on all cylinders all the time, but it's much better, and at least for my purposes, it's much better to watch. I mean, as Justin said about the assist rate, that's just fun basketball to see. You're getting some of the old stuff, the old Dean Smith passing offense. There's a little bit of that in there with the lobs, but then also it's modern in terms of some of the movements that they have. I mean, you have someone like Jaron Stevenson wouldn't have had that type of freedom in the 1980s, and I like that. It fits a modern player, but it has classical sensibilities, and it has been really effective. I think not only is it more aesthetically pleasing, just speaking for myself, but I like the way that the team is overcoming some physical limitations that I think that it has, that we've highlighted previously, in terms of not having a go get a bucket guy necessarily. And they're working around that. And they did it against, I know Kansas is down, but they did it against a team that historically has given them a lot of problems and is known for their defense. And that second half, they absolutely carved them up. And so whatever happens, as long as they get wins, these last two sort of what we call warm-up games, then they'll be primed, I think, to build on that going into Thanksgiving Day against Michigan State.
Justin, an assist for a lob dunk to one of your boys, or a made basket for you? What made you the happiest? Or where did you get your most joy?
That is a crazy question to ask me. I'm give me a bucket any day of the week. That was just me. Call me selfish if you want to, but that's just kind of how God made me, I guess.
So let me. I'll dig into that, and I'm gonna ask you another question from the chat: a floater or a three?
Early on in my career, I loved. I mean, I was floater was. I mean, when I hit a floater, it felt really, really good. As my career went on, threes, and maybe that's just because I made more of them. I was more consistent. Threes were definitely, especially in the Dean Smith Center. I mean, when you hit a three, it's different than when you just hit a floater, right? So I think that's kind of where it came from.
I can add something to this. I guess it would have been July of 2012. Justin, correct me. I think that's when I scouted you the first time. It was the 16 and unders at the Peach Jam. My first impression was, I was like, okay, hand-eye coordination, tall. And all you're looking for, at least all I ever looked for with young guys, is just to show some potential. You're not looking for them to be great yet. Just give me a reason to come back. And so my initial scout was, okay, skinny, not at that time, not above the rim in the games that I saw, not shooting a lot of threes in the games that I saw, but tons of those baseline floaters. And I was like, okay, real reliant on this shot, but if you have the body control to make that shot consistently at that size and coordinated enough to dribble around with it, in against a tight defense, and that's pretty impressive. And Justin was already a known player, but that was the thing that stood out to me when you're evaluating young players. They don't need to be totally refined. And then the next year, 17 and unders was when the threes happened and more dunks happened, and that Houston Hoops team just had a lot of talent overall.
Yeah.
But it's funny you mentioned that, because I came away thinking, I was like, well, maybe he can shoot threes, maybe not. Let's revisit this discussion in 2013. Of course, everything worked out just fine, but there you go. Of course, some historical perspective on Justin Jackson.
What's so funny is like I could always shoot, like I'll say decently, but like I mean I averaged a boatload of points in high school, and I'd probably say 75 to 80% of them were floater and mid range. Like there was like that's all I ever shot, and so then it was like, okay, well, I'm gonna have to shoot. And it's funny because like I see people kind of take digs at some of, some of the guys we've had come through North Carolina, like here recently, that have been dubbed as shooters, um, but don't necessarily turn out as a shooter in their first year. And like I think back to like my freshman year, and I always make the joke, like it felt like I averaged an air ball from three every single game my freshman year in college. And I think that's just because in high school, that's all I did was shoot the floater. I mean, I'd shoot the floater from the free throw line. It didn't matter where I was. Like that's just what I felt comfortable. And then as my career went on, I guess you just kind of have to evolve and get a little bit better in other areas. So that's funny that was 2012. That was a while ago, man.
Oh man, it was yesterday.
See, here you go.
We're talking to Justin Jackson and Rob Harrington. What's the toughest shot on the court, Justin?
Toughest shot is a baseline floater. That's the toughest shot on
Like
the move.
seven
On
or
the
eight
move.
footer.
Yeah. Like if you're driving baseline trying to shoot a floater on the baseline, that's a tough one. You
What's
have
the
very
unstoppable
little.
shot?
Come
That's why
on,
you
man.
went floater, right? Nobody could stop that. You're what, 6'8", 6'7", 6'8", 6'9" at that time. You shoot a
Yeah.
floater, nobody's stopping that.
I think the most unstoppable shot was Bryce Johnson's hook, me personally. I
Well,
don't know if I
because
ever
he pogo sticked it. I mean,
yeah, I never saw anybody get anywhere close to if he missed, it wasn't because the defense was good. It was because he missed. So I'm gonna give Bryce the nod on that.
hey, look, somebody in the chat said the sky hook. It wasn't a Kareem sky hook, but I mean, when you elevate, like I remember watching Donald Williams in high school, and everybody knows what he did in Carolina in '93 Final Four. But I remember watching him in high school. He played for Garner right up the road here, and dude elevated so much on his jump shots. Nobody at that age was
Mhm.
getting near him because I mean, guys have grown and gotten taller over the years, but
Right.
when his waist is at your eye level and he's shooting a jump shot, you couldn't stop him. He put 47 up on my high school team, and we had a guy that played D1 too. He had 36 in that game. But Donald would come down and elevate, and it was like you just hope he missed. And to your point on Bryce Johnson's deal is if he's not missing it, you're not stopping it.
Mm-mm.
Anyway, any other thoughts here on this topic, Rob? I think as somebody in the chat asking, I think it's a fair question about back to Kyan Evans is let me find it because I don't want to misstate it. How much of Kyan Evans' non-shooting is because of the success of the front court? He doesn't need to at this point in the season, Rob.
I think that's definitely true. I mean, we all agree on that, and he's I think proving to everyone and himself that he can be a point guard because he came into this year as a combo. He definitely was not a true point last year, and so he's showing that he can do the facilitation. Now, having said that, it was the start of the second half against Kansas when he really came to life, both as a shooter and a playmaker. I think we talked about this after Kansas, where it was either first or second possession where he hit Vasar off a screen and roll. I think Vasar slipped the screen and he hit him for a dunk, and that lit the team. And so I think and then he went on to hit a couple of big threes. I think it needs to be the whole thing. Now, I want him to be a complete player, and Justin already said that he did that when they needed him to, especially after he had a terrible first half against Kansas. I mean, a horrible first half. And he came out immediately the second half and turned it on. And you saw what it did for the offense, having him take the lead and be that assertive as a playmaker, but also as a shooter. And that's what that's what I'm looking for. I'm not asking him to be Trae Young necessarily, but I do want him to have, I think the team will benefit as he becomes more and more assertive over the course of the season, understanding that right now he's playing beautifully unselfish. And I don't think his defense has been bad either. I mean, we haven't really talked a lot about that, but I think his defense is a little better than expected too.
Justin, you can get in on that. You're nodding in agreement there for folks watching on the or listening on the audio version. I mean, that is one thing that Carolina got cooked on last year repeatedly was on ball defense from the guards. I mean, and that puts your bigs in trouble right away. They've clearly got more rim protection this year, but they still don't have the depth to get a lot of guys in foul trouble. Just speak to the on ball defense or the perimeter defense that you've seen so far from this team, because I think it's going to be relevant when they start playing these tougher teams with tougher guards.
Yeah, I mean you've got four guys on the perimeter, including Caleb Wilson, who can guard 1 through 4, right? And then you've got big fella behind him waiting for anything that gets to the rim. Right now, he's not necessarily this, he blocks everything at the rim type of guy, but being 7 feet with length, as long as the defender isn't just blown by, right, it's going to be a difficult shot for the opposing team to finish at the rim. I think that was another thing, not once again, it's obviously against Central and no disrespect to them, but less talented than some of the other teams that they're going to play against, especially as the season goes on. But that was one of the things watching Kyan throughout the game was the way he moved his feet, the way he cut people off. Guys would, they had a guy that just came off of a 38-point game, and the way that he would cut him off and then cut him off again in the same play. Like, for me, that's all you can ask for. And to your point, I think last year, whether it was size of the backcourt or just, some of the lapses on defense, that was one of the things that was talked about was kind of, defensively, like how does this team make up for some of the issues that they had with this team? I mean, you've got 1 through 4, and Luka is, obviously he's not the strongest defender, but he's smart, has an IQ, understands how to defend in certain situations. So I mean, defensively, I love where this team is. Like, obviously it helps having a rim protector too, but the way that they're able to switch 1 through 4, and that's another thing that these games help with. There was some miscommunication at times with some of the switches, whether it was a back screen, do you switch, or, a down screen, it's an easy switch out, just little things like that, that I think they'll just continue getting better at defensively throughout these games leading into some of the bigger ones.
Rob, Justin mentioned Caleb Garden 1 through 4, but one person we don't talk about enough in that regard, and I think the Coast guys talked about it last night, is Jaron Stevenson. He locked up R.J. Davis. Was it last year? Or was that 2 years ago? Whenever it was, he's got the ability to get out there on some guards. So when Seth Trimble gets healthy, which has still got a while, you've got all these guys that can really guard out on the perimeter. And not only do you have Vasar protecting the rim, you've got guys out there protecting him from silly fouls, because depth at the 5 is going to be an issue. At some point in this season, it's going to come up. But just, Rob, talk about Jaron Stevenson's ability when he's fully engaged, and he needs to be, to play defense on the perimeter too, and sort of add to that length and that switching ability that this team has.
I give him a lot of credit because in the summer and the fall, I mean, Hubert Davis talked about it too, about how he needed to be more aggressive. I actually think defensively he has been engaged and very connected, and that's why I'm okay with him not scoring a lot, because he's so valuable to what the team can do defensively. He gives them so much more versatility because they don't have the exploitable matchups they had last year with no fix. Now they do have a fix because they can move him around. They can change coverages if they want to. That's the versatility that he gives you. I would love to see him be more aggressive as a scorer. That's true, especially doing something other than shoot threes. I was glad the other night to see him look for a shot a little bit more. Hopefully over these next 2 games, he'll continue to do that just to get to maybe 8 or 9 points per game. He doesn't need to be a top scorer, just to be in the mix a little bit more. But I'm not too fussed about it because they do have really assertive people around him, and his defensive impact, I think, has been even more outsized than I thought it would be. So I give him a lot of credit. I haven't felt myself questioning his aggression. I mean, his style is not the most physical. He's never going to be Antoine Jamison or Tyler Hansborough as a rebounder, but I think he's given them a lot of value. Even when Trimble comes back, I still for now favor Stevenson in the lineup over Bogovac because I think the team has more balance between offense and defense.
It's a fair point, Justin. Let me ask you one more question before I move to a couple questions in the chat. What bothers a player the most defensively? Is it a guy that gets in you and bodies you up? Is it a guy's length? Or all of the above, obviously. But if you had to go against one certain thing that you didn't like as a shooter and as a player, and obviously you had the height to shoot over a lot of people, but what bothers players the most?
I think it just depends. I mean, my whole career, to Rob's point, when I was in high school, my whole career, defensive scout was just to be physical as possible. So I kind of came to enjoy when guys would get physical with me because I started to learn different ways to use that against them. Some guys don't like that, right? Like some guys don't like whenever they're getting touched or when they're getting, pushed around or whatever. Um, but length is always tough. And I think the crazy thing about Jaron Stevenson is like he's got both of those. Like he has the physicality, but he also is long and athletic. Um, and so it's like I think that's why he could be defensively at least. He could be like the X factor for this team because he's probably besides Seth, he's probably the one guy that physically can guard any position. And so I think aggressiveness wise, it's offensively for him. If he can be more aggressive, just get a few more shots up. I mean, there was one early on in the game where it was like kind of like a jumbled up transition play. And there was one guy in the corner, one guy kind of slot, and he had the ball in the wing and he just kind of held it and there was nobody in front of him. For me, just shoot the ball, right? Like just get a few more up. We're not going to be mad at you if you shoot 5 threes as opposed to 3. But defensively, I think he's going to be super key for this team just because of what all like he brings to that side of the floor.
When you're shooting a three, here's a question I always ask shooters, and I always tell people talk about closeouts and all that. When you're shooting a three, when is it too late, no matter what the defender does?
Like too late as the defender, like for him
Yeah,
to get
when is a
off. What do you mean?
defender too late? I've always said once you're up off the floor is too late. What
Yeah, I
is
mean, it
that
just that
for a
depends.
shooter?
That depends. Like it for certain guys, like Marcus, it was too late if you let him like get it to his pocket. Um, for some guys, it's a little bit slower, right? Like, Jaron Stevenson, you might be able to kind of short close and then get a late hand because his shot takes a little bit longer. Um, but I think I was always a guy because some coaches didn't like it, but I was always a guy that was like in between the short close and the like run out at him and then get a hand up at the last second. And as long as you got a hand up, it was considered good defense. So I think it just kind of depends. I've played against guys. I always tell the story of playing against KD my second year, first year, one of the two. And I jumped early to try to contest him, and he rose up and shot it like I wasn't even there. So for some guys, it's like I think you're walking on the floor, you're too late. But some most of the time you can just get a hand up and guys it'll throw off guys' shots. So, I just want to see him be aggressive. That's all.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I want to see him be physical and aggressive. I like to see him like get a tough foul, just foul the hell out of somebody and knock somebody down and get fired up about it. But I agree. I think he's an X factor. Rob, anything else? I've got a couple questions in the chat that we're going to get to, and we can talk about the ACC. There's been almost 300 folks in here, so I want to bring them in. Rob, I'm gonna let you. Anything left on these topics that we've hit tonight? I think we've covered it. I think what we'll see in the Navy game is more refining of what they're trying to do because I think St. Bonaventure's is going to be a decent ball game, but refining it against Navy and then working on it during the week. But Rob, your thoughts before I pop some of these questions on you?
No, I mean, I think I would like to hit on the ACC just a little bit, as we mentioned, and take some of these questions because we have some good ones. So I think we can do that.
All right. How many does Luka have a 30-point game this year? Justin, what do you think?
It won't. I mean, it won't be because he's not aggressive enough to get one. I think he does. Like he's got a maturity about his offensive game, like a pace of play. Obviously, he can shoot it. he'll have one of these games where, like those 19 shots that he shot against, I think it was Radford, like he'll hit 12 of them. Whether that's against an opponent that's really, really good or against an opponent that's not as great. I mean, he's for sure got one in him.
I don't think there's any doubt that he doesn't hit 30 at some point because he may take 25 shots in a game. I mean, if he gets up 19 against Radford, Rob, I ask you this one. Will Kyan have his 20-point game?
I'm going to go Georgetown at home. I think it's close. I think it's on the way. I don't think it'll be next week, but I think coming out of that, win or lose, I think that's when it's going to happen. He's not far off because I think if he hit a couple early, you'd probably start seeing him hunt his shot a little bit more. I feel like he tends to let things process, and he's downloading information early, and he's doing a great job as a facilitator. I think at some point though, he's going to decide that he wants to shoot a little bit, to sort of like what Justin's saying. He's going to find his inner scorer, and we're going to see him get to 20. I'm a little less optimistic, if that's the right word for it, that Bogovac will get to 30, only because I think there's enough. Certainly when Trimble's back, I think there's enough depth back there. It's going to be hard for any of those guys to get to 30. We'll see. I agree that he would like to, but whether he actually will, I don't know. But I do think I'll be surprised if Evans doesn't put forth a few 20s.
Do we need to put something down on Bogovac getting 30 this at one point this season? I mean, we can go off the air wager there. I just think he's going to shoot enough. So we'll see how it goes. Does Carolina rebound enough? Do you guys think Carolina will rebound effectively against Michigan State, Georgetown, Kentucky, and Duke? Everybody's concerned about Duke. That's a long ways away. But does this team, Justin, have it to rebound against those physical teams? They've shown, I mean, on the season, they're out rebounding their opponents by 15. Obviously, it's a small sample size with some lesser teams, but do you feel like this team's in a position to be able to rebound with these more physical teams they're going to see?
I think they do. I think, I mean, the biggest stat, and you always have to preface it at this point with the talent that they're playing against, size they're playing against, but offensive rebounding 40% of their shots. That's a lot of extra opportunities, right? And so, yeah, they might get, you play against a Georgetown team who is very physical. I mean, all of Ed Cooley's teams have always just been, hey, let's just be as physical as possible, play hard. So you play against some of those, you're going to give up some offensive rebounds, right? Like there's going to be times when maybe Henry gets kind of pushed away and there's an offensive rebound involved, or maybe Caleb is going against, a brute at the 4, and maybe he gets, pushed around a little bit every once in a while. But to be able to offensive rebound, I think is going to be the key for this team. And they have the ability to do that, right? They've got a guy like Caleb Wilson who hits the glass. They've got a guy like Henry who is 7 feet tall in there. They've got a guy, that's one thing about Jaron Stevenson. He doesn't mind getting off in there and kind of, changing things up a little bit in there. Jonathan Powell coming off the bench that's got some length and athleticism. So rebounding wise, I'm not too concerned. Now, we start to have some foul trouble, to your point. I think that's where you start to kind of have that conversation. But as far as the main guys, the guys who, the starting 5, the 3, 4 off the bench, I'm not necessarily too worried about the rebounding.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm Henry Vasar, I'm not fouling anybody. I mean, I'm letting them go. I think they're, he can't be the guy that challenges everything, and he's got to play super smart. To your point, Jaron Stevenson's got 10 offensive rebounds on the season, only trails Caleb Wilson's 11. Vasar has 9. Rob, I'm going to let you ask this, and then we're going to talk about the ACC, or answer this. Jake Zcal asks, any concerns about the first half of games where they don't look as crisp as in the second half? Rob, that one's for you.
Well, first, I need to know what type of fish Jake Zcal is holding in that avatar. I can't tell. He can add that into the chat. But I'm
That's a
not
trout.
I'm not as concerned about that for the reasons we discussed. I think when they're especially against these lesser light opponents, it's hard to come up totally dialed in. I mean, we've seen the Smith Center crowds be low energy too. It's not like they're playing on Saturday night at 7:00 when everyone's tuned up. I'm not too worried about that. Kansas, I appreciate the concern. My hope is that it was some big game nerves. Evans in particular had such a rough first half, and I don't think that's characteristic for him. I don't think that he's going to make a habit of bad first halves. He just happened to have one that game. So I'm not concerned about it yet. Let's see what happens against Michigan State, because that was a team last year that they fell behind by tons and tons of points, and they ended up coming back and should have won that game. But that was an example of a team that was more ready to compete out of the gate than they were. I think that will provide a nice A/B comparison in some respects. I mean, two different teams, but it's still Tom Izzo. And I think that'll give us a nice litmus test to evaluate these guys in that first half.
All right. So he says it was trout. And if you heard me when you asked, I said that's a trout. I know my fish, and I'd love to go catch some and eat some. Caleb Wilson, will he drop 30 in a game? Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt about that. I'll go head up against anybody. Somebody asked, have we talked about the backup five? Yes. Basically every show we've ever done on basketball this season, we've talked about the backup five. And that is still a work in progress for this team. I mean, see, there's Aiden High or James Brown and probably really Jaron Stevenson or something like that. So that'll be an ongoing discussion. Trying to see if there's any more. But Rob, you want to talk about the ACC? NC State beat VCU. It looks like a little bit. I think the kid from Texas Tech had 30 or close to it. I think State's going to be a problem. But Rob, your thoughts on the ACC?
I wanted to mention this because I do think it's worth talking about some. I mean, obviously, it's still very early in the season, but as someone who's followed the ACC for a long time, in addition to Carolina's struggles, it's hard to watch the ACC be a bad conference. I mean, last year it was a bad conference, and they got stomped by the SEC. I mean, humiliated by the SEC. This year, they have mostly taken care of business, notwithstanding a couple of bottom dwellers like Boston College. But overall, I do think the conference has more talent and more continuity. I feel like these teams are improved. There have been some frustrating near misses, almost real big wins. You know, they haven't quite gotten there. But keeping in mind from an infuriating metrics point of view, those close games still help, because the metrics aren't necessarily looking at wins and losses the way that we might intuitively and think they would. So the fact that those games are close and not romps, it does boost the conference numbers some. It would be better if they win those games. I think everyone will be watching the SEC challenge, and they've got to at least be competitive. I don't expect them to win the challenge, but I do expect them to do better than last year, which was absolute rock bottom. And I think that the league is far from vintage, but it's also, I think it will be closer to the top leagues than it will be the mid majors. Whereas last year they were hanging out around the MVC and others. This year, I don't think that'll be the case. So I mention it as a piece of encouragement. I think from a Carolina point of view, that's going to produce more. Too early to get into quad one stuff, but more quality opportunities, let's call it that way, whether it's Q1 or high Q2, however you want to think about it. I think there will be more good games, more fun games, more national attention on the league, because more good teams will be playing each other. So I just think it sets up to be a lot more fun, helpful with Carolina's resume too, but just a more fun year when you have a better league.
Yeah, and they got better players. I mean, you've got some of these schools have some tough players that they've lacked a little bit. Justin, your thoughts on the league in general? You know, I think Carolina's going to be pretty good. I think State's going to be pretty good. Duke's obviously a thing. Louisville's going to be good. Um, you know, who else do you see, and what do you want to see out of the league? And just as an aside, and Rob, vintage is gone. ACC is never going to be vintage. Vintage is before Justin was even born. But but your thoughts, Justin, on the league and the players that it has, it's certainly a lot better than it was last year.
Yeah, I mean, and let me preface with like my North Carolina is through and through. That's my team. Okay. But when you look at this ACC, right? Unfortunately, you look at Duke, they're number one on Kim Palm net rating, right? You look at Louisville, they're number 10. You look at NC State, they're number 20, right? Like you look at Virginia Tech, will they be great? I don't know, but they've got some good talent. They got a freshman down there that if nobody's seen him, they need to check him out, right? They've got Florida State just lost to Florida by 2, right? Virginia's got a player that played in the ACB in Spain, which to me that doesn't necessarily make sense, but like there's talent everywhere. Wake Forest should have beat number 6 Michigan. So there's definitely it will definitely be a more exciting the matchups will be way more exciting. And I think too, y'all you had mentioned, I think Rob, it was you that had mentioned how, or maybe it was you, Tommy, that had mentioned of how the non-conference this year was so much weaker than last year's was, right? I think a big part of that was because they knew the ACC wasn't as strong as it normally was. So you needed some of those wins non-conference to be able to add to the resume. This year, yeah, you need a Kansas game, you need Michigan State, you need these games here and there. But now you've got, I mean, you've got some quad 1, quad 2 games that will be in the conference. So I think it's exciting to kind of see the ACC. You know, to your point, is it back? Will it ever be back? There's a lot of money down there in the Southeastern Conference, but to see, you know, at least the top 6, 7 teams, 8 teams be talented and be a legit challenge throughout the year, I think it's going to make everything a lot more interesting.
Rob, before we get out of here, last question for both of y'all, and I'll start with you, Rob, since you mentioned what is a successful ACC SEC challenge record for the league? I mean, what was it last year? 14-2 SEC, something crazy like that.
Yeah,
What's
it was
successful?
abysmal.
What does success for the ACC look like in the challenge? And I don't know if it matters, but I think it does matter when they start passing out tournament bids. You know, and everybody in the Southeastern Conference gets one, it seems like. So I think these games do matter. Obviously, Carolina has Kentucky in Rupp. That'll be an adventure. What's success for the ACC for the conference?
I think they need to hit the 40% mark thereabout. Like I said, I don't expect the conference to win the challenge. It'd be great if they did, but they need to win their share of games, however you want to define that. I would consider 40% to be competitive, and they need to not have embarrassing high profile losses. So like last year, Carolina getting routed at home by Alabama did a lot of damage because Carolina was favored in that game, believe it or not. And after that, people sort of threw in the towel on them. You know, this isn't a very good team, was the belief. So that game did a lot of damage to the league's reputation, and there were others too where there were blowouts. So I think being competitive, winning their share, doing well in the high profile games, probably not a fair expectation for the Heels to win at Rupp. But I don't think that they'll be totally outclassed. I mean, I'm not looking. I know we talked, Justin, painful memory about that Indiana game that you guys had, where it just nothing went right that night. So hopefully that won't happen. You know, at least it's a competitive game. If they can't quite get over the top, that's all right. Then the better teams in the league win their home games, which they failed to do last year. So that's what I'm looking for. What I would call, I think, a fair measure of success. Not expecting the ACC to be as good or to win it, but to be in most games and to win roughly 4 out of 10.
Last question for you, Justin. You can chime in on what you think success, but also you mentioned that Indiana game. Obviously, we've talked about 2016, but what is a game, like maybe an away game or something that stood out to you, whether it was the SEC Challenge or Big Ten ACC Challenge or whatever back then? But also, I'm not saying a loss. But what game stood out? What's one game that stood out for you?
It's funny you mentioned Rupp because Rupp was my first true away game as a freshman. And that stands out to me for sure because that was the platoon system. That was an unreal situation. Another one that stands out to me, I guess it wasn't the SEC. It was against Iowa. Was that my sophomore year? That was I think it was sophomore year because I'll never forget that because Iowa came in and they got after us and it was like a green out. Like I don't know why we went with green in the stands for the shirts, but it was a whole thing, like with Coach Williams, like with the green and like it was a big deal.
It was recycling or something.
Yeah, it had something to do. Yeah, and so those two games, when it comes to, I mean, the first one was just an away game, but as far as a challenge, the Iowa game stood out. But I'm not gonna lie to you. I'm looking at the ACC SEC challenge. Out of the what is it? Is it 16 games that they're playing the different matchups?
That's what they
I mean,
played last year. Let me see.
I wouldn't be surprised to see it go 50 and 50, like 50% each way, me personally. Um, I do think that North Carolina will surprise people going into Kentucky. Um, I think right now Kentucky is coming into the season, they were more highly regarded. They had some better, whether it was transfers or guys coming in. Um, but the makeup of this North Carolina team against this Kentucky team, I think is going to be a lot more interesting of a matchup than people probably would expect going in, especially because it's going to be the whole Seth Trimble out. Don't necessarily expect North Carolina to go into Rupp, to your point. But I think North Carolina will surprise them. But I mean, I'm looking at it and I'm not going to say who I think will win these games, but I think 50-50, I think I wouldn't be shocked to see this year with the challenge, which makes me extremely excited to be able to watch it as a fan, as opposed to, like y'all said, last year's stomping that was going on in this challenge. I mean, it was every single game. Who's playing? Oh, all right, let's go ahead and take SEC on this one. So, yeah, that's exciting.
It's some interesting matchups, and I'm gonna get out of here. But you got Florida at Duke. That'll be a big one. Georgia at Florida State. Couldn't tell you. Miami at Ole Miss. Couldn't tell you. Carolina, Kentucky, Missouri. This is what's crazy about these games. I mean, these are conference games. Missouri at Notre Dame. A&M at Pitt. Tennessee at Syracuse. Virginia Tech at South Carolina. Oklahoma at Wake. LSU, Boston College. Clemson at Alabama. Oof. Mississippi State, Georgia Tech, Louisville, Arkansas. State goes to Auburn. SMU at Vanderbilt. SMU at Vanderbilt. ACC. Virginia at Texas. A lot of interesting games there. Rob says 40%. Justin says 50%. I say let me read up about it and watch a little more basketball before we get there on December 2nd. Maybe we'll make some predictions. Guys, I'm going to get out of here. We're over an hour. It feels like we've been talking for 10 minutes, and that's what's cool about this show. Shout out to Rob. Shout out to Justin for joining me. Shout out to Johnny T-Shirt. I don't talk about them enough. Sponsors of the Inside Carolina shows and sponsors and great friends of the Inside Carolina community. Join up at Inside Carolina and then go get your Johnny T-shirt code and get your 10% off. Guys, it's always a pleasure. Carolina Navy tomorrow night in the Smith Center. Rob Harrington and me right back here on your screen. We'll be talking about that game and looking ahead to the next one, which is St. Bonaventure's on Tuesday before Thanksgiving. As always, everybody stay safe. Thanks, boys.